I've been married to my wife, Sarah, for 15 years now. We've got 2 kids together, and I've been sitting here trying to figure out how to even start telling this story. There's so much to it, so many twists and turns, so much time that has passed, and so many things I didn't expect. It's been a journey. So, here goes nothing. Sarah and I grew up in the same town, but back then, we didn't really cross paths much. It wasn't like we were rivals or anything, it's just that we didn't seem to be in each other's circles. I knew of her, of course, like everyone in a small town knows everyone else. But we weren't exactly best friends or even close acquaintances. I always thought she was pretty, but I didn't think anything of it until high school. It was a random thing, honestly. Some of our mutual friends started dating each other, and that's when we started hanging out more. At first, we were just friends, just part of the same group, but as time went on, something clicked. And I'm not talking about just friendship. The more I got to know her, the more I realized there was something special about Sarah. She was funny, kind, and had this way about her that made everyone feel comfortable. I had this strange feeling every time she laughed. And I didn't want to admit it at first, but I started to really like her. I had always been a shy guy, not the kind of person to go after a girl unless I was 100% sure. So for a long time, I kept my feelings to myself. But after a while, I couldn't ignore them anymore. I got up the courage one day, and I asked her out. She said yes, and I'm not gonna lie, it felt like I was on top of the world. I'd had a crush on her long before that, but now it felt real. We started dating in the final couple of years of high school, and things just sort of fell into place. We had plans, big dreams about the future. We were even talking about going to the same college. But then reality hit. Her dream school didn't offer the program I wanted, and after some serious thought, I decided to go to a different college. My school had everything I wanted, but hers didn't offer the same programs. If I'm being honest, part of me wanted to convince her to come to my school, but she wasn't interested. And looking back now, I can see that was the first sign. It was subtle, but it was there. We tried the long-distance relationship, but it was hard. College is a time when everything changes, and no matter how much we wanted it to work, we just weren't in the same place anymore. The distance grew, and so did the tension. After a while, we realized we were just holding on to something that was slipping through our fingers. So we broke up. I can't say it was easy, but it was probably for the best. Time passed. We both went our separate ways, and I focused on my career. After graduation, I moved back to our hometown, and it was just one of those moments when life felt like it was all coming together. I had a steady job, a small apartment, and was finally figuring out what I wanted out of life. Then, by some strange coincidence, I ran into Sarah one day while I was out running errands. It was like no time had passed at all. She was just as beautiful, just as smart, just as funny as I remembered. We talked for hours, and before I knew it, we were catching up like we had never been apart. And just like that, the spark was back. We started talking more regularly, texting every day. And then, out of nowhere, she moved into my apartment. It felt fast, but it also felt right. It felt like we were meant to pick up where we left off. Things were great at first. She was about to graduate, and my career was on the rise. We were both in a good place, and it seemed like we had finally found our way back to each other. But there was something that nagged at me, something I couldn't shake. During that time, Sarah had this friend named Jason. Now, I'm not gonna lie, Jason was good-looking. He had this charm about him, the kind of guy who could talk his way into or out of anything. And I hated him. I didn't trust him at all. He was the kind of guy who flirted with everyone, and I could tell he had a thing for Sarah. She swore up and down, with all sincerity, that there was nothing romantic between them, that they were just friends. And I wanted to believe her. I really did. But deep down, something didn't sit right with me. Jason had a way of showing up at the wrong time, always lingering, always there when I was least comfortable with it. We had conversations about it. I told her how I felt. I told her how uncomfortable it made me when Jason was around, and I didn't like how close they were. She assured me over and over again that there was nothing between them. She swore it. She even swore to God. And I believed her. I trusted her. At least I thought I did. But over time, I started noticing little things. Things that didn't add up. The kids started needing more of my attention, and I found myself swamped with work. There were always things to do, always someone needing something. And maybe I leaned too heavily on Sarah. Maybe I didn't show her enough appreciation for everything she did. I thought she knew how much I appreciated her, but looking back, I see now that I wasn't expressing it enough. She was doing so much for the family, and I wasn't holding up my end of things as well as I should have. It started with little things. When I'd come home from work, I'd hear her laughing, and it would sound like she was having a good time. And it wasn't with the kids, it was with Jason. At first, I thought it was harmless. But then, one evening, I came home and found her standing at the counter, washing dishes, with Jason sitting at the island, chatting away like they were the best of friends. When I walked in, the whole room went quiet. It wasn't awkward, but it felt off. It was like I wasn't even there. It felt like I was an outsider in my own home. Jason didn't say much, but we exchanged a few words. We'd had talks before, and I'd let him know how uncomfortable I was with their friendship. It wasn't a big argument, but I'm sure he thought it was amusing. He didn't take me seriously. After a few minutes, he left. But something was still nagging at me. What was going on between them? That night, when I tried to be affectionate with Sarah, she pulled away. She said she was tired, that she had the kids all day. I understood that being a parent is exhausting. But after a while, it started to feel like something else was going on. She'd pick fights over the smallest things. I'd try to get close to her, and she'd shut me down. This went on for months, 6 months, maybe more. It felt like we were drifting further and further apart. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. One night, I just asked her point blank, "Is there someone else?" And that was when everything blew up. She exploded, tore into me like I'd never heard before. She called me every name in the book, dragged out all of my insecurities. It was brutal. And if that wasn't enough, she didn't talk to me for a week after that. She shut me out completely. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. But I didn't know how bad it was. I didn't know how deep the betrayal went. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I booked Sarah a spa day. I wanted her to have time for herself, to relax, to have a break from everything. I wanted to show her that I cared, that I appreciated everything she did for our family. While she was out, I did something I'm not proud of. I asked a friend of mine, who worked as an electrician, to install some small cameras around the house. I know it sounds extreme, but I was desperate. I didn't want to believe what I was starting to suspect. I hoped, deep down, that I was just being paranoid. My plan was to check the footage over the next few weeks, and I thought if I saw nothing, I'd just put it all behind me. When Sarah came home that day, she was smiling, laughing. It felt like things were back to normal for a little while. And for a moment, I let myself believe it. But then one day, I got a notification on my phone. It said that a door had been left ajar. It seemed odd, but I thought I'd check the cameras just to see what was going on. And what I saw changed everything. I noticed a pair of shoes by the front door. They weren't mine, and they weren't Sarah's. They didn't even look like they belonged to anyone in my family. Something told me to check the bedroom camera. I was hoping it would all turn out to be nothing. But when I saw what I did, my heart sank. It was Sarah. She was walking out of the laundry room with Jason, adjusting her clothes. I could see his pants were still undone. She wasn't just talking to him, she wasn't just laughing with him. They had been together. My stomach dropped like a rock, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My whole world felt like it was shattering. I thought about rushing home and confronting them, but I didn't. Not right away. I thought about the kids. They didn't deserve to lose both their parents over this. It wasn't about revenge, it was about the kids. I had to be strong for them, even if it felt like I was dying inside. But once I gathered myself together, I called a family friend and asked if the kids could stay with them for a while. I needed space to process everything that had happened. They agreed. When I came home that day, Sarah was in the kitchen, cooking. The smell of the food hit me like a punch in the gut. It felt like a farewell dinner, like I was getting my last meal before everything changed. I sat down at the table, and it was like time stood still. I didn't know how to start, how to bring this up. But I had the video, the undeniable proof of everything. I pulled out my phone, opened the footage, and showed it to her. All I could say was, "Why?" And at first, she tried to lie. She tried to deny it. But eventually, the truth came pouring out. She admitted to everything. She and Jason had been sleeping together for 3 years. And to make it worse, she was pregnant. It was like she was tearing my world apart, piece by piece. And then she dropped the bombshell. I wanted a divorce. It felt like my heart had been ripped out. My parents had divorced when I was young, and I'd always promised myself I wouldn't put my kids through the same pain. But now, here I was, facing the same fate. I got up and walked upstairs, my head spinning. It felt like everything I had worked for, everything I had built, was crumbling. It was all gone. In that moment, I won't lie, I thought about ending it all. It felt like the weight of the world was crushing me. But then, just as I was drowning in despair, something unexpected happened. My daughter called me. It wasn't the word she said, but it was what I needed to hear. She told me she loved me. In that moment, I found the strength to keep going. I had to be there for her. I had to be there for my kids. The darkness didn't go away immediately. But I knew that for them, I had to keep fighting. That was my lifeline. That was my reason to keep going. I kept thinking back to that moment when I first asked Sarah out. Back then, I had no idea where life would take us. There was no way I could have predicted all the twists and turns, the ups and downs, and how much it would all change. Sometimes I wonder if I'd known then what I know now, if I would have still gone down that road with her. But I suppose that's life, isn't it? You make your choices, and you live with them, for better or for worse. The first few years of our marriage were a whirlwind. We had dreams and goals, a whole future ahead of us. We were young, in love, and didn't know a thing about the struggles that would come. But as the years went by, reality set in. We had kids, 2 of them, to be exact. And with kids came responsibilities. I always thought that I would be the one who took the lead, who kept the family together, but there was always this tension simmering beneath the surface. I think part of me always wanted to believe that Sarah would always be the same person I'd fallen in love with. But people change. Circumstances change. I changed too. I remember the first time I truly saw the shift in Sarah. It was subtle at first. She wasn't as interested in spending time together. I'd come home from work, and she'd be busy with the kids, or cleaning, or doing whatever needed to be done. She was always running around, doing something. And I'd get frustrated. I started feeling like she didn't need me anymore. But in reality, it wasn't that she didn't need me, it was that I wasn't seeing her needs. I wasn't looking at the bigger picture. I think I was so wrapped up in my own world that I missed her sinking into a space where she felt invisible, like she was doing everything alone. I know now that I should have seen it. I should have been more present. The nights when we'd fight were the hardest. They were the nights I felt like we were miles apart, even though we were sitting right next to each other. The arguments felt pointless at first, petty things about who forgot to take out the trash, who didn't clean up after dinner. But looking back, I realized those little fights were the cracks in the foundation. We were both so tired. We both were carrying more than we could handle. And instead of talking, we shut down. She would close off emotionally, and I would do the same. I was afraid of showing weakness, and I think she was, too. We were both too proud. I think the real breaking point came after I saw her with Jason that night. Jason was one of those guys who just seemed to have it all. He was charming, confident, the kind of guy who could talk his way into anything. I hated that he was always around. Even though Sarah insisted nothing was going on between them, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was just something about him that set off alarms in my head. He wasn't just a friend. I could see how he looked at her, how he treated her like she was something to be won, something to be coveted. And for the longest time, I told myself that I was just being paranoid, that I was overthinking things. I tried to trust Sarah. I wanted to believe her. But in my gut, I knew something wasn't right. And when I came home that day to find them together, laughing, as if everything was fine, I could feel my world starting to tilt. I walked into that kitchen and immediately felt like I was intruding. Like I wasn't even part of this life anymore. It was a familiar feeling. I'd felt it before, when she was distant, when she was too busy for me, when she seemed to be looking for something I couldn't give her. The worst part, though, was how she acted when Jason left. I tried to talk to her, to ask what was going on, but she pulled away. It was like she was closing herself off even more. She'd say she was tired, or she'd pick fights about the smallest things. She'd tell me I wasn't doing enough around the house, that I wasn't helping with the kids as much as I should. It felt like every little thing was an attack. But I couldn't understand why. I was trying. I was doing everything I could, and it felt like it wasn't enough. I think I knew deep down that I was losing her. But I didn't know how to fight for her. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. The more I tried to get close, the more she pushed me away. It was like we were strangers. And that hurt more than anything else. After that first argument, when I asked her if there was someone else, I thought maybe I was just being dramatic. Maybe I was overreacting. But then I saw it, with my own eyes through the camera footage. Sarah and Jason in the laundry room. My wife, the woman I had built a life with another man. She wasn't just talking to him. She wasn't just hanging out. She was with him. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about our life together came crashing down. All of the years we'd spent building a family, building trust, seemed like they meant nothing. I sat there, in my office, watching the footage over and over again, trying to convince myself that I was wrong, that I had misunderstood. But the evidence was clear. And with every passing second, I felt like I was suffocating. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to accept it. But the truth was there, staring me in the face. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to see. But I didn't rush home to confront her. Not right away. I had to think. I had to process it. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was just numb. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, and I was standing there, alone, gasping for breath. What I did next is something I still struggled to forgive myself for. I had cameras installed in the house. I had a friend help me out, and while I didn't want to do it, I felt like I had no choice. I was desperate for answers, desperate to know the truth, even if it shattered everything I had believed. I know now that it wasn't the right thing to do. But at the time, it felt like the only thing I could do to protect myself from being blindsided again. I wanted to find out if I was just imagining things, if my fears were overblown. But deep down, I knew the truth was already starting to reveal itself. When Sarah came back from her spa day, I watched her like a hawk. She seemed to be in a better mood, like she had been recharged. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe everything was fine. But then the notification came. I couldn't ignore it. I watched the footage, and there it was, proof of what I already knew. My wife, the mother of my children, was with another man. I think I was in shock. I don't even remember the drive home. It was like I was in a daze. When I got home, I didn't know how to start. I didn't know how to tell her that I knew. I didn't know how to ask her to explain it. I couldn't even look at her the same way anymore. And when she admitted it, when she told me everything, it was like the floor dropped out from under me. I wasn't prepared for the words she said. 3 years. 3 years of betrayal. 3 years of lies. And to make it worse, she was pregnant with Jason's child. It was like the world as I knew it was coming to an end. I had worked so hard for this life. I had put everything into this family, into our future. And it was all crumbling, right in front of me. I walked upstairs, numb, my mind racing, my heart breaking. And for the first time in a long time, I thought about what my life would look like without her. Without the kids, without the family we had built together. But as I sat there, on the edge of that darkness, something happened that I never expected. My daughter called me. She wasn't old enough to understand everything that was going on, but she said the one thing I needed to hear. "I love you, Daddy." It wasn't just words. It was a lifeline. In that moment I knew I couldn't give up. Not for me. Not for Sarah. But for my kids. For my family. I had to keep going. I had to be there for them, no matter what. That phone call, her voice, was the anchor I needed to pull me out of the darkness. It reminded me that there was still good in this world. That no matter how bad things got, I wasn't alone.